no one wants to manage databases if they can avoid it. That's why MongoDB made MongoDB Atlas, a global cloud database service that runs on AWS, GCP, and Azure. You can deploy a fully managed MongoDB database in minutes with just a few clicks or a few API calls. MongoDB Atlas automates deployment, automates updates, handles scaling, and more so that you can focus on your application instead of taking care of your database. You can get started free at mongodb.com/atlas. Now, if you're already managing a MongoDB deployment, Atlas has a live migration service, so you can migrate it easily with minimal downtime and then get back to what matters. Stop managing your database and start using MongoDB Atlas. Hi, this is Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking to Marlene Mhangami from Zimbabwe. She's calling in from Harare. How are you?
I'm doing good, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So we were setting up, just getting ready for the podcast here and, clearing out the hard drive and checking the sound levels and stuff like that. And you mentioned that the power had just gone out, which is kind of inconvenient if you're trying to do a podcast.
Yes, it is kind of inconvenient. It literally just went out just before we were actually supposed to record this. But fortunately, I have a generator, so the generator is running right now. But yeah, definitely, the power is gone.
So we were going to have a conversation about constraints and the kind of the funny dichotomy about how programmers do really well when you constrain, like whether it be you constrain their memory or their hard drive or their processor power. We sent people to the moon with a lot of really constrained CPUs and things like that. But on the African continent and in Zimbabwe specifically, where you are, there's a number of infrastructure and technical constraints that I would think make it difficult for someone to be a really successful programmer. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty fair. I think compared to other countries, there's definitely in Zimbabwe and in a lot of countries across the continent, I think there are things like power, for example, that make it quite difficult to be a successful developer. I know we talked a bit earlier about the internet and how you don't really think about your bandwidth with your internet. And I think for me, I have for a while, I actually lived in the States for a bit and was just really surprised by how, for example, how cheap the internet there is. And if you come back to Zimbabwe, the internet is, I don't know how many times more expensive. And it's quite shocking because almost everywhere you go on the continent of Africa, there are similar challenges where the price of data is just ridiculously high, or if you don't get expensive data, you have to work with data that's really unreliable and it breaks all the time. So yeah, those are just some of there are a lot of constraints for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you, and forgive my ignorance, I know the answer to some of these questions because for the audience to know, my wife is also Zimbabwean, so I've spent time there. I've lived there, although I've lived on the west side in Bulawayo area and in the Belly side. I'm curious, are you on DSL or fiber? What's the internet options? If I move to your neighborhood, what are my choices for internet?
So right now I'm on fiber. I think where I live in a neighborhood where Zoll has laid. So Zoll is the internet company that I use and most people use in Zimbabwe, I would say, or at least in Harare, from what I know. And we have fiber laid around the neighborhood, and that's mainly what I use. And I think most people use that. I know some people use vibronics and things like that. But outside of that, I think it's mainly fiber, especially in my own neighborhood.
Hmm. Now, in Zim, there's this concept of high density and low density, right? And I
Hmm.
usually think of that as being like the suburbs or the
Hmm.
rural areas, or maybe the suburbs, or I'm not quite sure what the best way to describe. How do you describe the high density areas, other than that they are high density?
I mean, the high density areas, I don't know. They're very like I feel like the low density areas is more in terms of we talk about, I think Harare is very much so divided by class and by
Mm,
wealth. And so I would say in the low density areas, it's mainly people who are a bit more wealthy. And then in the high density areas, we actually call them high density areas because the houses are grouped so closely together.
hmm.
And that is, people who are not as wealthy sometimes, live there in quite close proximity. And they're very, I mean, they're in very different areas of the city and represent two different classes in the city.
But it's fair to say that they don't have fiber optic going to their apartments, though.
It's probably, I don't know. I actually would not know that, but it's probably unlikely that they would have fiber optics. I'm not sure though. I don't
Mm,
know. I'd have to
okay.
double check that. Because Zoll as well, Econet, who is the company behind them, um, have tried to push to have coverage in most areas. But generally speaking, fiber is actually very expensive. And so the average
Mm,
Zimbabwean, I don't know if the average Zimbabwean is able to, and, the average Zimbabwe that's living in the high density areas, I'm not sure if they would be able to afford fiber, let alone internet. I think
hmm.
maybe mobile data every once in a while, but like Wi-Fi or something like that, I don't think it's something that everyone has.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting to juxtapose how you're thinking about and describing internet where you are, and then you said that you spent some time here in the States. I'm in I would call it a low density area where it's a suburb about 50 kilometers outside of Portland, Oregon. I have fiber optic to the house, but my brother, who's about 20 more minutes outside of town, is in the rural areas in Bulawayo and Ndebele. They would say like ekaya, like way
Mhm.
out, in the bundu.
Exactly.
And he does not have fiber because they can't bring it to him, right?
Yeah.
So he uses cell phone data, and this is a really interesting juxtaposition because this is in America, where if you ask the average person, oh yeah, you have all the data and you have cable modems and all this fast internet. They have three phones in their house, three Android phones
Yeah.
with 5 gigs each, and then they take turns each week of the month using each phone, and then they tether it, and then that's the internet for that week,
Wow. Whoa.
right? But that's a thing you would expect. Like you've heard things like that before. Like, okay, I'm a working programmer and I'm tethering my laptop to my
Mhm.
cell phone and I have 5 gigs, and when I'm done, I'm done.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's not a concept that I'm used to in terms of thinking about the United States, like thinking that there are people who don't live in like 100% comfort with the fastest things ever in the United States. I think I have just a picture of it that is, you know, kind of whitewashed in terms of
Mm,
everyone is in a certain class bracket.
yeah,
So I would never think that, So
yeah.
it's very
Well, we have
interesting.
we have dial up actually here. If you go deep enough into the rural areas, there's still about I think there's about 2 million people that use dial up.
Wow.
There's a lot of satellite. My brother uses these phones. He puts them on the windowsill so that they get better signal. So you
Wow.
say like I want to. So if his daughter, my niece says I want to use YouTube,
Hmm.
and they only have 5 gigs per phone, they put the phone on the window, and then they say, okay, now you can do your YouTube. They do the thing, and then they turn the phone
Wow.
off.
Wow. Definitely something that happens here. And I think
Mm,
there have been times that I have tethered with my phone when I haven't been able to have access to Wi Fi before. Um, but yeah, it's just very interesting to know that that is also happening in the States. But definitely, yes, I think internet in general is something that is not. Yeah, it's not something that is an equal thing that is available for everyone. So yeah,
hmm.
very interesting.
So you're the director and a vice chair of the Python Software Foundation, and you're also the chair of Pycon Africa, and that was
Yes.
virtual this year because of the pandemic. I'm curious how this problem with easy, inexpensive, and pervasive non-metered internet would affect a virtual conference your side.
Mm.
If you go and say, "Hey, young person, you should go and check out Pycon Africa," you can see Marlene and all these great Zimbos doing great stuff. You can see people from all over the continent, but you have to stream on YouTube for 2 days. Would that use all the data on a cell phone pretty quickly? And how where would they get that data? Would they go to their university? How would they work through those constraints?
Right. I think it's quite difficult. It's something that we thought a lot about when we were deciding whether or not we should have Pycon Africa, because in general, I think across the continent, not everyone has access to stable internet. Africa I will say Africa is a huge, huge continent. So there's so
Mm,
many people on the continent. And I will say that I think that most people have access to data, a certain amount of data. But if it's good streaming level data where they're able to access a conference like PyCon Africa, it is very expensive. So
mm,
for us, we knew that for streaming the conference and having people attend live, it was not going to be this was not going to be something that's accessible to the entire continent. There are some people that are absolutely going to be excluded from being able to stream just because if you're if you don't have if you have not paid for a certain level of internet, you won't be able to stream because at a certain price point, the internet is not stable. It's not great. It's very expensive. You're not going to have the data to be able to carry something like that. So for us, what we have tried to do is that we made sure that we provided streaming live for people who are able to attend live. And then we also are recording the sessions. We recorded all of the sessions and we'll have all of them up on our YouTube channel and
mhm.
accessible for everyone for free. Because I do feel that in terms of data bundles and things like that, it's easier if you can just download a talk. If you have a talk specifically that you would like to watch, downloading it is much easier than trying to stream it live.
Mhm.
And at least with that option, you'll be able to watch it offline or something like that. But 100%, there were so many constraints that we had to think through. And the only reason I would say that we had, even a certain amount of people show up for the conference online is because the continent is huge. And so you will have
Mhm.
a certain bracket of people that are able to attend it live, but it's an even larger amount of people that will not be able to access that. So, yeah.
It sounds like it was a dramatic success, though. I was very blessed to be
Yes.
involved peripherally and give a talk, and I thank you so much. But even then, we had a situation where a speaker had their power go out, but ironically, I think they were in the U.S. when their power went out because my power goes out about twice a year.
Exactly. It was very strange, and thank you so much, Scott. Like you came in and saved the day there. We ended up doing a very last minute joint keynote, and
Hmm.
it was very fun. William, who was supposed to speak, William is originally from Rwanda and has done a lot of great work with the Python community in East Africa and also in the States. But he's based out of, I think it's Pennsylvania. Um, and they had just some sort of a freak storm or something like that where his power left. And so
Yeah.
very bizarre. He was actually one of two speakers that ended up having the streaming not work for them because of either power outage or something like that. So yes, did not expect that from
Yeah.
yeah.
That's William Hakizimana, who's
Yeah.
in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was definitely having storms. And the gentle irony there that he said that he'd been there for years and years and years, never had a problem with power, and then while doing something as epic as PyCon Africa, his power goes out. So a
Yes.
little bit of
Yeah.
irony,
Really
irony
just
there.
yeah, I don't even know how to explain that, or I don't know how to feel about that. So it's fine though.
Well, the part to be proud of is the fact that PyCon Africa went off without a hitch, and it was an epic talk. It was an epic conference, and the videos all online?
Thank you. I the videos aren't yet online. We've already started finished the editing process, I think, for some of them, but they should be, hopefully they will be online in at least a week from now or in a few days from now. Most of the talks will be on our YouTube page. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, friends, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Text Control. They're not only the creator of the fully featured document editor library for .NET and Angular apps, but their libraries also have powerful PDF functionality. So you don't have to program PDF documents. You can make MS Word templates and then merge them with data, and that'll let you create pixel-perfect PDF and PDF/A documents. The best part is fillable form elements like text boxes and checkbox fields and drop-down elements, and you can add those easily to your PDFs and make filling out forms really simple for your users. And don't forget, TX Text Control gives developers a complete solution to handle PDF documents in any business process. So check it out. You can try it free. See the live demos at textcontrol.com/demos. It's just that easy. textcontrol.com/demos. The other thing I wanted to ask was that, so you're a vice chair, you're an officer in the Python Software Foundation.
Yes.
Was being on the continent, or your proximity, your lack of proximity to Europe and America, was that difficult, or is it because the internet is the great equalizer, getting involved in community and moving up into such a prestigious organization? Were there any constraints, or were there any troubles in the way?
Well, I think that, I mean, first of all, like off the bat, I had a lot of personal, I talk quite a lot about how when I first I had someone recommend that I run for the board of directors for the PSF, I absolutely didn't think I was qualified to. I absolutely didn't think I would make it or be able to contribute. And I think that a huge part of that is because so much in terms of the technology world happens in the United States. It's happening in Europe. Very little of, it seems sometimes that very little of the technology advancement is happening in Africa. And so for me, I had a lot of fear going into the board in terms of, oh my gosh, do I know what I'm talking about? Do I have a right to say something to these people? And I think that personally, I 100% felt that sort of imposter syndrome of maybe I shouldn't be here because Africa sometimes is just left to the side and I don't know what I was thinking. But seeing more and more, I think that Africa has a lot to bring to the table. And there's so many people on the continent that are overcoming barriers to be able to create things and do things that I think are phenomenal, and things that people in the US are not doing, people in Europe are not doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for myself, I think slowly coming to the realization that, okay, I actually do think I have something to say. I think that Africa as a continent has something to say and has something to bring to the table. And so I think over time that has helped me feel confident, even when there are, things like power cuts or whatever that are maybe, make me feel a little bit more humble. But other than that, I will say that over time I've felt more confident about it.
What do you say to others? Because it seems to me that there's a huge untapped human asset on the continent, and it's just simply accessibility to the internet and visibility to get more folks doing things like that. I mean, would you say to someone who's maybe listening to this podcast and they're on the continent, or they have friends and family on the continent, that if they feel that sense of imposter syndrome, just apply for that position, go and volunteer for that, or run for that board? What do we tell them?
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. I think that it has to be, yeah, I think you have to just be able to do things even if you're terrified to do them. I'm usually scared to do things, but I think just taking a risk, and at the end of the day, for a lot of things you don't have anything to lose. And like you said earlier, the internet is becoming, more and more of an equalizer for people, and more companies, I would say, are looking to hire from Africa. I think I'm allowed to say this, I think I'm allowed to say it. But I'm actually myself about to start an internship with NVIDIA on Monday, actually. I think I'm allowed to say that.
Well, after this podcast goes live, it will be after Monday, so
Okay,
they
great.
can't they can't they can't fire you, right? So
They can't fire me now. It's too late. Great. So, I mean, for myself, when I was talking to the person that was interviewing me, and they actually had reached out to me because they're doing a lot of work with Python and data science with GPUs. And I really wanted to work on this project when I first heard about it. But I think initially I was like, oh, I don't think I should do this, because I don't know, I felt like maybe I'm not good enough to do it. But at the end of the day, I think you have to be able to just trust that even if it doesn't work out okay, you'll still be okay. And so it's just worth it to just take the risk and do it anyway.
mm-hmm.
And I think that for me, that's something I am trying to teach myself, and it's something that I would encourage other people, specifically if you're from Africa or another underrepresented group, to do.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's two things to parse out there, and I'm interested what you think. There's one's own personal imposter syndrome, which I have, which you've expressed that you've had at times, that sense of I'm a phony and someone's going to figure out that I don't know what I'm talking about. And then there's also, and I'm curious what you think about this, for lack of a better word, almost a continent-wide imposter syndrome that is imposed by historical context and colonialism. And just like
Yeah.
personal imposter syndrome, you want to say, hey, you can do this. Like, I don't know why you feel that way, but you're awesome and you should do that. I'm hearing you say you almost want to say that to everyone on the continent who might feel like colonialism is giving them low self-esteem, to say, listen, do that thing. Let's do it together.
Oh, absolutely. That's so well worded. That's really well worded. I think, yeah, I remember having a conversation with some girls like a year ago or something like that, and they just started an internship with this other company that's like an international company. And for them, it was their first time actually working with white people on a tech project. And I think for them, like, both of them came back to me with feedback saying that they one of their major struggles was working with white people and feeling I think feeling that they couldn't just feeling this fear that I don't know if I can talk to a white person or if I can do the same work as a white person. And 100% that one of the things that I think contributes to that is Zimbabwe having been colonized and having this this feeling that we aren't as good as white people because of how we were conditioned to think when the colonial rule was there. We were taught that we were inferior. We were taught that we are not the same, and I think it's a constant struggle across the continent to fight that off. And I think as well for the world around us, I think, treating Africa, I think people around us also need to make sure to make an effort to treat Africans as equal, to see them as human, to see us as human beings. I'm like, damn, I am an African myself. And I think it's something we struggle with. And hopefully, as the world becomes more globalized, as Black people become more empowered, that won't be an issue anymore, hopefully.
You have a really great talk that you did in April at Pycon where you talked about leadership and identity in the Pan-African Python movement. I thought that was really thoughtful. Did you feel that was very well received? Were people excited about that talk, and were you nervous to give it?
I think I was nervous to give it because I think I really enjoyed making the talk. And I talk a lot about philosophy in the first half of it. And I was intentional about doing that myself because I wanted to. I always find philosophy is something I've enjoyed for a while now because my brother, I have a twin brother, and he actually was a philosophy major in college. And I think that people, I don't know if it's just like a societal thing, but people kind of get surprised by that I know anything about philosophy at all. But there are actually some very strong, even African philosophers that I think the world has just not been introduced to yet, for example. But I think when I was giving the talk, I was a bit nervous about the reaction because I know in America sometimes and in Europe, there is a movement that is not necessarily for diversity, is not necessarily for globalization as well. And I spoke a lot about unity and how through the African Python community, through being a leader in that space, I have seen that unity is so important and diversity is so important, and it is a key ingredient to innovation. And I think most people received it well. I was also shocked to see some dislikes on the YouTube video. I tried not to take it personally. I'm trying not to take that personally. There were a couple of dislikes. But that's also okay. And I don't know I don't know.
Just as a random aside, because I have a bad habit also of I'll get 50 likes and 1 dislike, and I'm like, who is that person? I'm going to your house. Somebody told me that maybe they're just trying to teach the algorithm that they're not interested in Python. It might not be that they dislike the content, but they're just saying, don't show me that in my recommended list.
Yeah.
So I use that little tip to keep me from flying to wherever those people are and destroying them.
That's a good tip. I have destroyed them many times in my heart. So
well, you put your whole heart and soul into a talk, certainly.
Yeah.
You don't need that down. I don't like down arrows. I'm more of an up arrow person myself.
Definitely. But it's okay. I think it just, I don't know. I think for the most part, the likes outweighed the dislikes. And so
very much. It's an excellent talk, and I'll make sure to put links in the show notes because you call out some important things that are One of the things that you said is that unity isn't diversity and unity isn't homogeny. Maybe you
Mm.
could expand on that for a second for me.
Right. So when I think of unity, in one aspect, I think a lot of people think they're unified just because they're in a group of people that have the same ideas as them, have the same, look the same as them, or something like that. And I think there's also a misconception about diversity as well, that it's just people who look different from you. Whereas, for example, in Africa, we can't talk about racial diversity as much because, I mean, everyone, no, okay, that's not true. There are white Africans and also other race Africans as well. But for the most part, you can go into places in Zimbabwe, for example, where almost everyone is black. And still you'll have huge amounts of diversity in that place where people look the same.
Mm.
But when I specifically was talking about the concept of unity, I think it's more than just having people, agree on something, or be the same. I think it's about making people feel included. So I said, one of my favorite quotes is that unity, a diversity is about demographics. Inclusion is about a sense of belonging. And I think
Mm-hmm.
unity is about making people feel like they belong. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have to see the world exactly the same. I'm going to see the world differently from you do, Scott, because I just grew up in a different world from you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can have overlap. Like, for example, you have lived in Zimbabwe, so there will be overlap in how we perceive certain things. But I think that a place where we have unity is a place where I can feel like I can belong in a community. I feel that people are interested in hearing my story, interested in welcoming me, and also sharing their stories with me. And I think cultivating kindness and things like that in our communities, I think that's when you get unity, and not just when you have people that look the same, or maybe people that are diverse but just hanging out together with no sense of unity. So
And I think that the most important thing that I'm hearing from everyone when we think about bringing new people into the community is to constantly remind them that you are supposed to be here, whether it be a board or a podcast or a Twitter or asking a question. There's all these opportunities for those who are already there to remind those who are coming up, hey, I'm happy that you're here and I'm excited that you're here and you belong here.
yeah, exactly. So true. Yeah, I think, yes, reminding people and going out of your way to do that, I think, is so great. I think I have seen you interacting with people on Twitter, especially people who are just starting out, and giving them validation and saying, "Hey, you're doing great. Hey, I've been in software for I don't know how many years, but I still struggle with this, or I don't have
Mm-hmm.
everything figured out." I think that's a huge way of making people feel like they belong, of making people feel like they're included. So things like that are super important. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you chatting with me today.
Thank you. This is really fun.
Just out of curiosity, and forgive me because when I was in Zim, we were speaking in Ndebele. How do you say thank you in Shona? I've heard Waita Zvako and I've heard Ndio Ntenda.
Yes, Ndino Tenda is what I would say. Or, yeah, I think that's fine. Even my,
Ndino Tenda.
yes, thank you.
All right. Well, Ndino Tenda, for coming on my podcast so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
I've been talking with Marlene Mhangami, and this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.